My name is Lucy, and I'm 31 years old. If you were to ask me whether I ever had big dreams, my answer would be yes, absolutely. As a little girl, I wanted to be a singer. I imagined myself standing under bright lights, holding a microphone, and making a room full of people fall silent with just one note. Music was the language I wanted to speak to the world. But dreams have a way of colliding with reality. After college, I found myself working as a credit officer at a small bank in Raleigh, North Carolina. It wasn't glamorous and it certainly wasn't my dream, but it was steady. It helped me chip away at my student loans and gave my life a sense of order, even if that order felt a little dull. Then one night, everything changed. I met Nathan at a college reunion party hosted by one of my friends. He wasn't just another face in the crowd, he was the kind of person who filled a room without even trying. He had this easy, disarming laugh and a charm that made conversation flow effortlessly. When we got paired up for a celebrity guessing game, it was as if we'd known each other for years. What drew me to Nathan most was that he understood me, the version of me I had quietly buried under responsibilities and reality checks. It turned out that he too had once chased the arts. He'd been a dancer in college, part of a small crew that performed at campus events, but eventually, he gave it up to follow a more sensible business path, just like I did. We started dating a few weeks after that night. My mother, who had been dropping not-so-subtle hints about wanting grandchildren, was thrilled. I wasn't entirely ready to settle down, but Nathan's warmth made it easy to imagine a future together. He was attentive, thoughtful, always surprising me with little things, like a bouquet after a long day, or new headphones because he knew I still hummed to myself while doing chores. A year later, we got married. It felt right, or at least I wanted it to. Not long after, I decided to quit my job at the bank to focus on our home and future family. Nathan was doing well at a financial consulting firm in Charlotte, and he told me I deserved to rest after years of hard work. For a while, I believed him. I believed everything would stay as simple and loving as it was in the beginning. But marriage has a way of revealing truths slowly, one layer at a time. It wasn't long before I began to understand more about his family, the people who shaped him. Nathan had a younger sister named Ivy, 3 years younger than us. His family often spoke about her with a mix of tenderness and protectiveness. They said Ivy had suffered nerve damage after a severe fever when she was 8 years old. At first, I didn't think much of it. But soon, I realized that the story of Ivy, and the secrets tied to her, would change everything I thought I knew about my husband, his family, and the life I thought I was building. They said that ever since the fever, Ivy hadn't been able to walk or speak. At first, my heart ached for her, a young woman confined to a bed and a wheelchair, robbed of her voice and freedom so early in life. But when I met her, I realized Ivy wasn't nearly as broken as I had imagined. There was a quiet strength in her, a softness that filled the room without words. Though she couldn't speak, Ivy communicated through her drawings and a small letterboard she carried everywhere. It took me some time to understand her rhythm, but eventually, I began to read her language, the tilt of her head, the light in her eyes, the curve of her smile. I'll never forget one afternoon on the back porch. The sun was dipping low, the sky brushed with gold and pink. I pointed upward and traced a musical note in the air with my finger. Ivy's lips curved into a smile. She picked up her board, but instead of spelling anything, she drew a heart. I laughed softly and signed, "You understand me." She nodded, her eyes shining like we had just shared a secret that belonged only to us. In that moment, I saw how much life still lived inside her, a quiet, beautiful defiance against the body that had betrayed her. If Ivy was a gentle light, then my mother-in-law, Linda, was a storm that never truly passed. She wasn't cruel in an obvious way, her words were always dressed politely, but there was something in her tone, in the sharpness of her gaze, that made me feel perpetually under evaluation. Every visit to her home felt like walking into a surprise test I hadn't studied for. "Don't leave Nathan's shoes lying around like that," she'd remark, her voice cool and clipped. "He looks like someone who doesn't have a job. And if your husband looks like that, who's going to respect his wife?" I'd force a polite smile, murmur an apology, and quickly place the shoes back in the closet. Linda's world had rules, invisible lines drawn so precisely that stepping over one felt like an act of rebellion. Towels had to be folded from left to right. Laundry was to be hung in perfect color order. Even the spice jars had to face the same direction. I didn't mind order, but the way she enforced it made me feel small, like no matter what I did, I was never quite enough. To her, Nathan would always be her little boy, and I, despite being his wife, remained the outsider, the intruder who had entered her perfect family. After the wedding, Nathan and I moved into a modest apartment about 20 minutes from his parents' home. I had hoped that bit of distance would give me room to breathe, but Linda seemed to have an uncanny sense of when I was alone. If Nathan worked late, she would call, or worse, appear unannounced, armed with a bag of groceries and a list of suggestions. "You really should use fabric softener, dear. It makes the towels less stiff," she'd say, glancing around as if conducting an inspection. Each visit felt less like help and more like supervision, as if I weren't her daughter-in-law, but a new housekeeper she was still training. And slowly, I began to realize that in the world I had married into, love came with conditions, and acceptance was something I would have to earn, if it was ever meant for me at all. I used to believe that marriage meant finding peace, a safe place where love lived quietly between two people. But over time, I learned that the home I'd entered wasn't built on peace, it was built on hierarchy. Every word spoken seemed to carry invisible weight, every gesture judged against an unspoken set of rules designed to please the head of the family. My sacrifices weren't seen as acts of love, they were simply expected duties, part of a role I was supposed to play without complaint. And the greatest irony of all, the person who would end up changing my life forever wasn't Nathan or his mother. It was Ivy, the one everyone believed was helpless, silent, and fragile. I can't pinpoint exactly when things began to shift between Nathan and me. Maybe it started a few months after our first anniversary, when his morning smile faded into silence, and my coffee cups went unnoticed. Or maybe it was when the midday texts, "Have you eaten?" or "Don't forget your jacket, it's cold out," simply stopped coming. The small gestures that once made me feel loved disappeared quietly, like a melody fading out before the final note. Nathan began coming home later and later, always with an excuse ready. Meetings ran long, he'd say, or the boss needed me to stay and go over some reports. I wanted to believe him. I told myself it was just work, that this was what married life sometimes looked like, two people chasing stability, passing each other like shadows. But the distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, growing wider by the day. When I asked questions, he deflected them. When I stayed quiet, he didn't notice. The laughter that once filled our little apartment was replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator and the clinking of my fork against a cold dinner plate. In that silence, I found myself turning more and more toward Ivy. I started visiting her whenever I could, ignoring Linda's subtle disapproval. Each time I arrived, Ivy would already be waiting by the window, her sketchpad open, pencils laid neatly in a row. Her drawings were full of life, tiny houses surrounded by blooming gardens, cats wearing little hats, children flying kites in wide open skies. Through her art, I saw her, not as the fragile girl everyone pitied, but as a soul bursting with intelligence, humor, and quiet strength. It amazed me how much she could say without a single word. At night, when Nathan worked late or sat hunched over his computer in silence, I began teaching myself sign language. At first, I only learned the basics, simple greetings, hello, thank you, good night. But slowly, I began to pick up more. It wasn't just a language, it felt like unlocking a secret world. Every new sign drew me closer to Ivy. Our conversations deepened, flowing with laughter, empathy, and sometimes, silent understanding. I didn't realize it then, but Ivy was becoming my lifeline, the one person who truly saw me, even when I was invisible in my own marriage. And in her silence, she was teaching me something I didn't yet know how to name, the strength that comes from truly listening, and the power of a truth quietly waiting to be revealed. Whenever Ivy and I spoke with our hands, it felt like stepping into a world of our own, a quiet refuge far away from the coldness that lingered in that house. In our silent conversations, there were no raised voices, no judgments, only understanding. It was the only place where I could truly breathe. But even those brief moments of peace were constantly shadowed by Linda's presence. Her words had a way of finding me, sharp and deliberate, like glass hidden in velvet. "I don't understand why Nathan chose someone like you," she said one evening as I finished helping Ivy tidy her room. Her tone was calm, but her eyes held that familiar glint, the one that made me feel as though I'd trespassed somewhere I didn't belong. "Ivy might like you," she continued, "but that doesn't mean I have to." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because with Linda, silence was the only defense that couldn't be twisted into offense. I had learned that she thrived on reaction, that every attempt to explain or justify only deepened her satisfaction. So I stood still, my back straight, my lips sealed. My silence was my shield. Nathan, on the other hand, never once stepped between us. Whenever I tried to tell him about her remarks, he'd simply sigh and say, "That's just how Mom is, Lucy. You need to get used to it." So eventually, I stopped mentioning it. And he stopped asking. Our marriage became a routine of avoidance, him pretending not to notice my unhappiness, and me pretending his indifference didn't hurt. Then came that early autumn evening, the air crisp and the leaves just beginning to turn gold. I decided to stop by Nathan's parents' house with a tray of freshly baked pumpkin bars. Ivy loved them, and I thought surprising her might brighten her day, and maybe mine too. When I stepped inside, laughter floated from the living room. It was a sound I hadn't heard in months, Nathan's laughter. He sat beside his mother, both of them smiling as though the world outside their little circle didn't exist. Nathan looked up at me, the warmth in his expression vanishing as quickly as it had come. "You're here tonight?" he asked, his tone flat, almost irritated. "I made these for Ivy," I said softly, setting the tray on the coffee table. "You didn't mention you'd be here." "There's no need to mention it," Linda interjected smoothly, her eyes locking onto mine. "Family can come by any time." Her words sounded sweet, but the chill beneath them was unmistakable. I wasn't included in that definition of family, not in her eyes. Trying to ignore the tension, I made my way to Ivy's room. She was by the window as always, but her sketch pad was missing. Instead, she sat hugging a blue pillow tightly against her chest. When she saw me, her expression softened. Her eyes asked the question she couldn't voice, "Are you okay?" I smiled, or tried to. Then I raised my hands and signed, "I'm fine." But as I did, I noticed my fingers trembling. The truth was, I wasn't fine. Not even close. That night, when Nathan and I returned home, he barely spoke a word. The silence between us felt heavier than ever, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that slowly erases the sound of love. And somewhere deep down, I began to understand, whatever had once connected us was fading. And maybe, just maybe, Ivy was the only one who still noticed. I took off my coat, hung it neatly on the hook by the door, and turned to face Nathan. He was already loosening his tie, his expression unreadable under the dim kitchen light. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked quietly. He froze mid-motion, his shoulders stiffening, as if I'd just accused him of a crime. "What kind of question is that?" I took a step closer, searching his face for something, anything, that would tell me I was wrong. "I don't know," I admitted softly. "I just feel like you're not really here anymore." "Not fully." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck before lowering his gaze to the floor. "It's just work, Lucy. Don't overthink it." There it was again, that phrase he'd begun using like a wall between us. Don't overthink it. Once upon a time, he would have pulled me close and told me everything was fine. Now, all I got were sighs and half-truths. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, turned away, and finished folding the dish towel on the counter. But deep down, I knew my instincts weren't wrong. Something was shifting, not just in Nathan, but in the entire family. The warmth that once filled our home had thinned into something cold and hollow. I, once the woman he couldn't stop talking to, now felt like an uninvited guest in my own marriage. The only thing that still brought light into my days was Ivy. Her gentle presence reminded me that kindness still existed in that family, even if it came from the one person who couldn't speak. I didn't realize it then, but her light was the one that would soon illuminate every secret Nathan and his family had buried beneath their perfect smiles. About 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint crackle of eggs on the stove. Nathan walked in, his face pale and uneasy, as though he'd been rehearsing something in his head. He placed his phone on the dining table and hesitated before speaking. "Lucy," he said, his tone careful, almost too careful, "do you have any plans for next week?" The question startled me. Lately, Nathan hardly asked about my schedule, or anything about me, really. My heart began to beat faster. "No," I said slowly. "Why?" He hesitated again, his gaze flickering toward his phone before settling on the table. "My family's decided to take a trip to Hawaii," he said finally. "My parents and me too." For a moment, I felt a spark of excitement. Hawaii. It was the place we'd once dreamed of visiting for our second anniversary, a plan that had quietly been forgotten as life got busier. But that fleeting joy evaporated as soon as I saw the look on his face. He wasn't smiling. There was no hint of invitation in his tone. "So, what about me?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm even as I felt the sting rise in my throat. Nathan's eyes dropped to the table, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee mug. "Lucy," he said quietly, "this time, it's just a family trip." The words hung in the air like a slow-breaking storm. A family trip. As if I wasn't family. And in that moment, I understood, I was no longer part of their circle. I was orbiting outside of it, alone, and whatever this trip meant, it wasn't just a vacation. It was the beginning of something far more deliberate. "Actually," Nathan said after a long silence, his tone suddenly cautious, "there's something important I want to ask you." A ripple of unease went through me. I set down the spatula and turned to face him, my heartbeat quickening. "What is it you want me to do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He hesitated, glancing toward the window as though searching for the right words. Then, finally, he said it. "My family would like to ask you to stay home and take care of Ivy while we're gone." For a second I couldn't speak. His words hit like cold water, numbing me. I had felt the distance between us growing, yes, but never had I imagined he would exclude me this completely. "Take care of Ivy?" I repeated, my disbelief breaking through. "Why not bring her along?" Nathan exhaled, as if he'd already rehearsed this conversation. "Mom said it would be too difficult for Ivy to travel that far. And she thinks you're the best person to look after her. You're close to Ivy, right?" The way he said it, soft, deliberate, felt like a trap disguised as flattery. He wasn't asking, he was cornering me. Saying no would make me look heartless. Saying yes meant accepting that I wasn't welcome on a trip meant for a family. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Nathan immediately walked over to answer it, relief flickering across his face, as if he'd been saved from confrontation. A minute later, Linda stepped into the kitchen. Her presence filled the room like a cold draft, precise, commanding, impossible to ignore. She wore her usual expression, one that balanced polite restraint with quiet disdain. "I believe Nathan already explained everything to you, Lucy," she said, her voice clipped and formal, her gaze steady and sharp. I stood there in the middle of my own kitchen, feeling the air grow heavier with every passing second. Nathan remained silent beside her, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Do you have any objections?" Linda asked, her tone smooth but edged like a blade. It wasn't really a question, it was a challenge. I felt anger rise inside me, hot and suffocating. But I swallowed it. This wasn't the moment to fight, not when they'd already decided everything without me. So I forced a smile, small and brittle, and said softly, "No, of course not. I'd be happy to take care of Ivy." Linda's lips curved into the faintest hint of satisfaction. "Good," she said briskly. "Then we can enjoy our vacation knowing Ivy will be in good hands." She turned to leave, her heels clicking confidently against the tile. Nathan avoided my eyes the entire time. When she finally stepped outside to wait in the car, Nathan lingered in the doorway before slowly turning back to me. "I'm sorry, Lucy," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to put you in a tough spot, but everything's already been arranged." I looked at him, my voice calm but laced with something colder. "Sounds like you made your decision before asking me, didn't you?" He lowered his head, his words barely audible. "I didn't have a choice." I wanted to believe that. But as I stood there, the sound of his mother's car engine fading into the distance, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before: Nathan always had a choice. He just never chose me. He walked out quickly, leaving me standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the kind of silence that hums with things left unsaid. I'd done everything I could to please this family, every dinner cooked, every smile forced, every opinion swallowed, and this was what I got in return: indifference, decisions made without me, and the unspoken message that I didn't quite belong. Yet, as the sound of the front door closing faded, I found a sliver of relief. At least, for the next several days, I wouldn't have to endure Linda's sharp remarks or her constant judgmental glances. That small thought was enough to steady me for what came next. Later that afternoon, I drove over to Nathan's parents' house to see Ivy. The familiar house felt different now, quiet, almost expectant. When I walked into the living room, Ivy was sitting by the window, sunlight glinting in her hair. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw me. I smiled and sat down beside her, signing softly, "I'm going to stay here with you for a few days, okay?" Ivy's hands paused midair, and she looked up at me, her big brown eyes blinking thoughtfully before she signed back, "They left you behind again." Her words hit harder than I expected. Left behind. The phrase lingered in my chest like a bruise. It was the first time she'd ever said it that way. I swallowed and nodded, deciding there was no point hiding the truth anymore. "Yes," I signed back. "They went to Hawaii." For a moment, Ivy was silent, studying me in that wise, unsettling way children sometimes do. Then she smiled faintly and signed something that made my heart skip. "We have plans, too. They'll be surprised." I stared at her, unsure if I'd read her signs correctly. Her expression was calm, almost playful, but there was something else behind it. Something knowing. Her eyes gleamed with a quiet confidence I'd never seen before. In that instant, I realized Ivy might understand far more than anyone gave her credit for. Maybe she had seen what I had missed all along. Maybe the truth, whatever it was, had been right here, waiting for me, in the only person who still looked at me with trust. And for the first time, being left behind didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't seen coming. The next morning, I opened the living room curtains at my in-laws' house. Warm spring sunlight poured in, washing the space in soft gold. The house was still and peaceful. Nathan and his family had left early for the airport, leaving behind an emptiness that almost felt cleansing. No more Linda's cutting remarks. No more disapproving stares over how I brewed her tea or folded her napkins. I made myself a cup of coffee and carried it down the hall to Ivy's room. She was lying on her side, gazing out the window at the lavender bush her mother had planted last year, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on the blanket. I knocked softly before stepping in. Something about the quiet morning, the light, and the girl in front of me told me that whatever Ivy had meant the day before, whatever plans she had, was about to unfold. And somehow, I knew my life would never be the same after this week. I brought coffee. "Vanilla blend," I said softly, "the one you like." Ivy turned her head slowly toward me, and what happened next shattered every assumption I'd ever had about this family, about her, about everything. She sat up. Effortlessly. For a moment I couldn't move. It was as if someone had pressed mute on the entire world. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the birds outside, even the ticking clock, all of it disappeared. My heart thundered in my chest, disbelief flooding my veins. "Ivy," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" A small, almost mischievous smile curved her lips. And then, she spoke. Her voice was clear. Gentle but steady. "Calm down, Lucy. Don't freak out." The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. You can talk," I stammered. "And walk." She swung her legs over the bed and stood, taking slow, measured steps toward me. Not a wobble. Not a trace of hesitation. Completely steady. "I never lost the ability to walk or talk," she said quietly, her expression unreadable. It was all an act. One I had to keep up for years, to protect myself. My knees weakened. I lowered the coffee cup onto the nearest table before it shattered in my hand. "Protect yourself." "Ivy, what are you talking about?" She sat down in the armchair by the window, the morning light outlining her in gold. Then she gestured for me to sit, too. My body moved on instinct, though my mind was spinning. When she finally spoke again, her tone was calm, too calm. "I'm Nathan's half-sister," she began. "His father had me with his first wife. My stepmother, Linda, never accepted me as part of the family. When my father died, she took everything, his estate, the house, the money, and me." I blinked, struggling to absorb her words. "But I thought you..." "She made sure everyone thought I was helpless," Ivy continued. "When I was 10, I had a high fever. She refused to take me to the hospital until it was almost too late. Afterward, she told the neighbors I had suffered brain damage." Her expression hardened slightly. It was easier that way, for her. People pitied her. No one questioned her. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. And you went along with it. Her gaze flicked up to meet mine, sharp, intelligent, hauntingly sad. At first, I didn't have a choice. But later, I realized something. The weaker I seemed, the less they watched me. And the less they watched me, the more I could learn about what really went on in this family. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk. You'd be surprised how much people reveal when they think you can't understand them. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible. The girl I'd cared for, protected, and pitied, wasn't a victim at all. She was the only one who'd truly seen everything. And as I looked into Ivy's eyes, I realized something terrifying. If she had been pretending all these years, what else in this family wasn't what it seemed? She smiled softly, her eyes glimmering with something warm and sincere. You were the only one who saw me as a real person, she said. Not a responsibility. Not a burden. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I just sat there, frozen, my mind racing to connect all the scattered memories that suddenly began to make sense. Her knowing glances whenever Linda criticized me. The subtle smiles when Nathan dismissed my feelings. The small, quiet winks that I thought were simple gestures of comfort. All this time, Ivy had been watching. Listening. Waiting. But why now? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why tell me this now? Ivy stood, moving with a confidence that seemed to fill the entire room. She walked to the closet, opened it, and pulled out a small, dark blue suitcase. Because, she said, her voice surprisingly light, we're going on a trip. I blinked in disbelief. A trip? She turned toward me, her eyes gleaming with mischief. You didn't really think I'd sit here and watch them have all the fun in Hawaii, did you? My mouth fell open. Wait, you're going to Hawaii? She nodded, holding up 2 plane tickets. Plane, tickets, hotel, everything's ready. And yes, she added with a faint grin, you have a ticket too. I stared at her, still trying to process everything. How did you even? Dad left me some money before he passed, Ivy said, her tone softening. I saved it for the right moment. Her eyes sharpened then, filled with determination. Lucy, you need to see who Nathan and his mother really are. You deserve the truth. And trust me, Hawaii is where everything changes. The air between us felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I looked at her, no longer the quiet, fragile girl sitting by the window with her sketch pad, but a woman in control, fierce and unafraid. She had hidden in plain sight for years, and now that she had chosen to step into the light, I knew there was no going back. I took a deep breath, my pulse steadying for the first time in months. If you're ready, I said, meeting her gaze, then so am I. Her smile bloomed, bright, certain, unstoppable. Good, she said. Then let's go. And just like that, the journey began. Not just to Hawaii, but toward the truth behind the marriage I had once believed was peaceful, behind the family I had tried so hard to belong to. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, our plane lifted off the runway. I sat beside Ivy in the economy cabin, the hum of the engines filling the air. My heart raced, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Just yesterday, I had quietly accepted being left behind. Today, I was choosing to move forward. And now, here I was, flying to Hawaii with the sister-in-law everyone believed was helpless. Ivy sat beside me, wearing a loose white shirt and faded jeans, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. A pair of sunglasses framed her face, transforming her from the quiet, wheelchair-bound girl I'd known into someone radiant, confident, free. Every so often, she turned toward me with a playful smile, the kind that carried a shared secret. It felt like we were breaking rules no one else even knew existed. I couldn't stop glancing at her, still trying to wrap my mind around everything that had unfolded in the last 24 hours. She tilted her head slightly as the flight attendant handed us our drinks. Still shocked, she teased. I exhaled, shaking my head. Not shocked, exactly. Just. I never imagined things could turn around like this. She smiled knowingly, swirling her orange juice. Sometimes, she said softly, it takes a shock to wake us up from a bad dream. I stared down at my hands. She was right. For years, I'd been living inside a carefully constructed illusion, believing in love that wasn't real, in a family that only accepted me when I stayed quiet. It wasn't peace I had, it was control disguised as harmony. After nearly 6 hours in the air, our plane touched down in Honolulu beneath a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Warm, humid air rushed into the cabin as the doors opened, carrying the scent of the ocean, clean, wild, alive. Ivy moved with purpose. She'd already arranged a taxi to take us to a luxury beachfront resort in Waikiki. As we drove along the coast, the turquoise water sparkled beside us, waves breaking softly against white sand. It was paradise, yet I wasn't here for the beauty. Neither of us were. At the front desk, the staff greeted Ivy like any other guest. Everything, room keys, payment, even the welcome drinks, had already been taken care of in her name. I glanced at her, quietly astonished, but she gave a quick sign for me to stay calm, and not speak until we were alone. When we reached our suite, I finally broke the silence. "Ivy, where did you get the money for all of this?" I asked, my voice low but urgent. She took off her sunglasses and turned to me, her calm composure returning. "Dad left it for me," she said simply. "I kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment." I frowned slightly. "But your plane ticket, the hotel, the taxi, this must have cost a fortune." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Dad told me once, live for yourself, not for those who try to cage you." She looked toward the window, where the sunlight glittered over the endless ocean. I think this is the moment he meant. For a while, I said nothing. I just stood beside her, watching the waves roll in. It felt surreal, me and Ivy, partners in a plan that felt both daring and dangerous. Finally, I asked, "So, where are we going to see them?" Ivy reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and opened a reservation confirmation. "Tonight," she said, turning the screen toward me. 7 o'clock. Poolside restaurant. The name of the restaurant flashed on the screen, the Coral Edge, a place known for its ocean view and exclusivity. She looked up at me, a quiet determination flickering in her eyes. "That's where they'll be. And that's where the truth begins." His mom had booked the family dinner for 6 p.m., right on schedule, just as Ivy predicted. "And you're sure they don't know we're here?" I asked, still struggling to believe the boldness of what we were doing. "Positive," Ivy replied, her tone calm but sharp with intent. "We're staying in the same resort, but a different building. They won't see us unless we want them to." We spent most of the day inside our suite, eating fruit and crackers from the minibar, while the ocean breeze slipped through the balcony curtains. Ivy told me to relax, to take in the moment, but my mind refused to quiet down. My thoughts kept circling back to what was coming that evening. It felt like we were preparing for a grand performance, and for the first time, I wasn't just watching from the audience. I was stepping onto the stage. When the clock neared 6, Ivy stood from the bed and began to get ready. She applied a light touch of makeup, tied her hair into a sleek bun, and slipped into an emerald silk jacket that shimmered softly under the light. I chose a long navy dress, simple, graceful, and stronger than I felt inside. When we looked at each other in the mirror, I saw two women transformed. Not the quiet, underestimated ones from back home, but two women who had finally taken back control. As we headed down to the poolside restaurant, Ivy gently squeezed my hand. "They're going to be shocked," she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "But remember, don't get angry. Let them reveal who they really are." I nodded, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of the waves below. The golden sunset spread across the sky, reflecting on the pool surface as soft jazz music drifted through the warm evening air. We slowed our steps as we neared the restaurant entrance, hiding briefly behind a row of potted palms near the terrace. From there, we could see the dining area clearly, Nathan's family already seated around a large table near the water. "That's her," Ivy whispered suddenly, her eyes narrowing. My stomach tightened. "You mean, she's the one Nathan's been seeing?" Ivy nodded grimly. "I saw messages on Mom's phone weeks ago. The woman called herself the backup plan." Her words hit me like a slap. Backup plan. So that's what I was now. Not a wife. Not a partner. Just someone who filled the space until he found what he really wanted. I turned my gaze toward the table. Nathan sat there, relaxed and smiling brighter than I'd seen him in months. He leaned close to the woman beside him, a tall brunette in a red dress, and whispered something in her ear. She laughed, touching his shoulder lightly. It was intimate. Familiar. The kind of closeness that used to be mine. Ivy's hand found mine again, steady and reassuring. "Ready?" she asked softly. I took a slow breath, the air thick with the scent of ocean salt and betrayal. "Yeah," I said, my lips curling into a calm, cold smile. "It's time for the real show to begin." Together we moved closer, positioning ourselves behind a line of palm trees just a few steps from Nathan's family table, hidden, but close enough to hear every word that was about to destroy their perfect little illusion. Under the golden glow of the restaurant's lights, glasses clinked and laughter rippled through the air like a well-rehearsed symphony. My mother-in-law, Linda, sat at the head of the table, her face radiant, her voice lively. Gone was the cold, judgmental woman whose every glance once sliced through my confidence. In her place sat a picture of grace and warmth, a perfect hostess, the kind of woman who could charm a room with practiced ease. But what truly hollowed out my chest was the sight of Nathan. My husband. Sitting close to another woman, close enough that her perfume seemed to mingle with his cologne. She was young, polished, confident. Her manicured hand rested casually on his as though it had always belonged there. Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't even glance around nervously. There was no guilt in his smile, no hesitation in the way he leaned toward her, whispering something that made her laugh. And all I could think was, this man had left me behind, alone, in his house, with his disabled sister, to play the loyal wife while he played the perfect son and partner, to someone else. Beside me, Ivy was calm, her expression unreadable. Without looking up, she slipped a small phone and an earpiece into my hand. I placed a recorder under their table before they arrived, she whispered, her voice low but steady. "You'll want to hear this." My pulse hammered as I slid the earpiece in. For a second, all I could hear was the soft hum of background chatter, then, their voices came through, crisp and unmistakable. Linda's tone was sharp, the way it always was when she felt secure. "She's never been anything special," she said, the words dripping with disdain. "Hasn't done a single thing for this family. If you're divorcing her, at least make sure she doesn't get anything out of it." Nathan's voice followed, calm and chillingly detached. "Don't worry. My lawyer says if we handle it right, I can claim emotional neglect. It'll make her look unstable, and I won't have to give her a dime. Maybe I'll even come out ahead." Then came Linda's quiet chuckle. "The girl next to you looks promising. Compared to Lucy, well, she's gold next to rotting wood." The word slammed into me like a wave of ice. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, slowly, I removed the earpiece, pressing my lips together until they trembled. Ivy didn't speak. She didn't need to. One look at her was enough, steady, unflinching, waiting for my decision. I nodded. Once. We stepped out from behind the palm trees, the faint rustle of leaves our only announcement. My heels clicked softly against the wooden deck as we approached the table, each step steady, deliberate, echoing louder than their laughter had moments ago. Nathan noticed me first. The shock on his face was almost comical, his mouth parting, his hand freezing midair. Linda turned next, her wine glass still raised, eyes wide with disbelief. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear, calm, but edged with fire. "I hope everyone's enjoying dinner." The entire table went still. Nathan stammered, his face draining of color. "Lucy, what are you doing here?" I smiled faintly, every ounce of hurt hardening into quiet resolve. "Oh, I thought I'd join the family trip." Then I looked at the woman beside him, who had the decency to pull her hand back, her face tightening with unease. I didn't realize the definition of family had changed. And in that single moment, the illusion Nathan and his mother had built began to crack, right there, under the warm Hawaiian lights. Before I could even open my mouth, Ivy stepped forward. Every pair of eyes at that table shifted toward her as she walked, slowly, deliberately, out of the shadows and into the light. Her movements were graceful but filled with quiet authority. Without saying a word, she pulled out a chair across from her stepmother and sat down, her emerald silk jacket gleaming faintly under the warm glow of the lamps. Linda's jaw went slack. For a long, stunned moment, she couldn't even form words. Then, in a trembling voice, she managed to whisper, You're walking." Ivy's lips curved into a calm, knowing smile. "I've been walking and talking, just fine since last year," she said softly, though her words carried enough weight to crush the silence between us. "You always preferred to see me as your burden, the helpless girl you could parade for sympathy. So I played along. I let you live in that illusion. The entire table went silent. Forks paused midair. The woman sitting beside Nathan immediately pulled her hand away from his, her face draining of color. I took a slow breath, then reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. With one tap, I opened the voice recording and hit play, turning the speaker volume all the way up. Linda's voice filled the air, sharp and unmistakable. If you're divorcing her, at least reclaim the assets. Then Nathan's voice followed, steady and cold. Say she's emotionally neglectful. My lawyer says if we do it right, I won't have to give her a dime. A hush swept over the restaurant. Other diners began to turn in their seats, their curiosity drawn by the rising tension. Nathan shot up from his chair, his face flushing. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. Are you seriously trying to humiliate me in public? I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. You've been humiliating me for over a year, Nathan, I said, my voice firm and clear. The only difference is, I'm not letting you do it behind closed doors anymore. Linda tried to recover her composure, forcing a nervous laugh. Lucy, sweetheart, we can explain. No need, I cut in sharply. I've heard enough. And I have the proof. When I return home, my lawyer will have it too. I paused, letting my words sink in. This divorce won't be quiet. Not anymore. Nathan's chair screeched against the wooden deck as he lunged toward me, his hand outstretched as if he could still control the situation. I stepped back, raising my hand to stop him. And you, I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm, you'd better be ready to face the consequences of your lies. The woman beside him quickly stood, clutching her purse, her face pale with fear. But before she could slip away, Ivy's voice cut through the air like a blade. You might want to prepare to meet a lawyer too, she said coolly. I'm sure you know exactly what you've gotten yourself into. Nathan's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightening, his face burning red with a mix of rage and shame. You're ruining my life, he spat. I gave a quiet, humorless laugh, my voice steady and almost serene. No, Nathan, I said. You already did that yourself. And with that, I turned away, leaving behind the wreckage they had built with lies, deceit, and arrogance. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Free. I just pulled back the curtain, literally and figuratively. Then I turned and walked away beside Ivy, leaving behind the soft golden lights, the clinking of expensive wine glasses, and a table overflowing with lies. Nathan's footsteps thundered across the stone path behind us. Lucy, he shouted, his voice cracking, no longer the smooth, confident tone I once knew. You can't do this. I didn't turn around, but Ivy did. Her eyes were cold, sharp, and unyielding. Looks like someone doesn't like being caught in the truth, she murmured. Lucy. Nathan's voice broke again, desperate now. You're trying to destroy my life. That made me stop. Slowly, I turned to face him. The man who once promised forever now looked small under the resort lights, sweating, panicked, utterly lost. No, Nathan, I said, my voice steady but laced with steel. You destroyed your own life. I'm just done pretending not to see it. He took a shaky step forward. But if the company finds out, his voice faltered. If they find out about this, I could lose my job. Before I could speak, Ivy crossed her arms, tilting her head with a smirk that was equal parts pity and disdain. Oh, poor Nathan, she said dryly. Maybe you should have thought about that before you brought your mistress on a luxury vacation and trashed your wife, while she was home taking care of your paralyzed sister. Nathan turned to her, speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a man gasping for air. I shook my head slowly. I didn't come here to cause a scene, I said quietly. But you and your mother left me no choice. You pushed me past every limit and now you'll face what you built. At that moment, the restaurant manager appeared, flanked by 2 security staff. His tone was polite but firm. Excuse me, sir. You're disturbing the other guests. We're going to have to ask you to step outside. Nathan's eyes darted around the room. Dozens of diners were watching now, some whispering, others simply staring, their faces lit with curiosity and judgment. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but saw the pitying looks, the cell phones discreetly raised to record. His shoulders slumped. Without another word, he let the security team escort him out, his head bowed. He looked like a man stripped of everything, status, control, and pretense. I stood still, watching him disappear through the glass doors until only the reflection of the sea remained. At the table, Linda hadn't moved. Her hand clutched her wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white, her once proud expression frozen into something brittle and hollow. She didn't say a word. Not to me, not to Ivy. As I turned away, leaving her in the ruins of her own creation, I felt a strange stillness settle over me. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was closure, quiet, heavy, and real. And with Ivy beside me, I finally walked away for good. Her eyes weren't proud anymore, just empty, hollow, like someone who had lost every ounce of control she once wielded. Ivy and I walked back to our room in silence. There was nothing left to say. We both knew things were only going to get more complicated from here. But beneath the tension, I felt something unexpected, a quiet, liberating relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped in a role someone else had written for me. I was no longer the obedient wife, or the accommodating daughter-in-law. I was simply me, and I finally had the strength to stand on my own. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains as I picked up my phone and made a call to North Carolina. It was time to take the next step. I contacted a law firm recommended by an old college friend. Though she no longer worked there, she arranged a meeting for me with an attorney named Marilyn Carter. From the first few seconds of our conversation, Marilyn's voice carried the kind of steadiness I'd been missing in my life, calm, confident, and unshakable. She didn't rush me. She just listened. I told her everything, how the marriage had grown cold, how Nathan had betrayed me, how his mother had treated me like an inconvenience, and how I'd discovered the affair during what was supposed to be their family vacation. I even told her about the voice recording Ivy had placed under the table. Marilyn took notes quietly, then looked up, her tone measured but firm. "You're entitled to file for divorce with clear evidence of infidelity," she said. "And considering your husband's employment and financial standing, we'll also seek spousal support after the divorce. Furthermore, if the other woman was romantically involved with him during your marriage, we can pursue a third-party interference claim against her." Her words were steady, professional, but to me, they sounded like justice finally taking shape. I drew in a breath and said, "I want to do everything legally possible to make this right." Marilyn's lips curved into a reassuring smile. "Then we will. I'll take care of the rest. And Lucy, trust me, you're not alone in this." Over the following weeks, everything moved faster than I expected. Marilyn's team worked with quiet precision, collecting every piece of evidence, hotel bills, flight records, credit card transactions, photos, and audio recordings. Ivy even managed to retrieve messages from her stepmother's old phone, each one adding another layer of proof. By the time we were done, the case file was airtight. A month later, I received the official court notice. Nathan was ordered to divide all marital assets equally and pay spousal support for the next 3 years. But that wasn't all. The other woman, Melanie Harper, was served with a civil lawsuit for alienation of affection, with a substantial compensation demand attached. As I read the documents, I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just felt still. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming everything I'd lost, my dignity, my peace, and the belief that I deserved better than the lies I'd been fed. For the first time in a long time, justice wasn't a dream. It was real, and it had my name on it. When the first payment hit my account, I stared at the number on the screen, and waited for a sense of victory to wash over me. But it didn't. There was no triumph, no surge of satisfaction, just quiet clarity. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. This was about reclaiming something far more valuable, my voice. For the first time in years, my worth wasn't being measured by someone else's standards. I didn't need validation from a husband who lied or a mother-in-law who belittled me. I finally knew who I was, and that was enough. Ivy walked over with 2 glasses of non-alcoholic apple cider, her smile radiant. "Congratulations," she said, handing me one. "No one can ignore you anymore." Our glasses clinked softly, and for once, the smile that spread across my face wasn't forced. It felt real, steady and calm, like the ocean breeze outside that afternoon. 3 months passed after the court ruling, and life looked nothing like it did before. The cramped apartment I'd once rented during my marriage had been replaced by a top-floor unit overlooking Pooland Park in downtown Raleigh. Every morning, sunlight spilled across my hardwood floors, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd pressed a reset button on my entire existence. I'd returned to my roots in finance, but this time on my own terms, as an independent consultant. I picked my clients carefully, worked only on projects that inspired me, and most importantly, I had the power to say no. No more manipulation hidden behind polite smiles. No more quiet humiliation passed off as advice. No more being small to make someone else feel powerful. Ivy and I stayed close. We weren't bound by marriage anymore but by something deeper, shared truth, shared scars, shared strength. We weren't just survivors. We were women who had walked through fire and learned how to build again. Ivy had moved in with a close friend in Asheville and finally enrolled in the graphic design course she'd always dreamed of taking. One evening, during a long phone call, she told me, "You were the first person who believed in me enough to live honestly." I smiled, my throat tightening. What she didn't realize was that her courage had lit a spark in me too. Her quiet defiance, her truth, it had given me the courage to rebuild my life from the ashes of betrayal. Then, one quiet weekend afternoon, while I was tending to my balcony plants, lavender, basil, and a small lemon tree I'd grown from seed, the doorbell rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door, and opened it. And there they were. Nathan. And beside him, Linda. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. The sight of them standing in my doorway, two ghosts from a past I thought I'd buried, sent a chill down my spine. Nathan's expression was uneasy, almost desperate. Linda looked smaller somehow, her once proud posture deflated. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor between us, waiting to hear what they possibly had left to say. Both of them looked nothing like I remembered. Gaunt faces, dark circles etched deep under their eyes, clothes hanging loosely on their frames. The air of superiority they once carried had vanished completely. Linda, always immaculately dressed, always in control, now looked drained, her shoulders slumped as though the years had finally caught up to her. "Lucy," Nathan spoke first. His voice was low, uncertain, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every word. "I know this is unexpected. But we need your help." I said nothing. My hand rested on the doorframe, but I didn't step aside. I didn't invite them in. He swallowed hard and continued, "After the lawsuit, I lost my job. They let me go without pay. Meline, she left me when she realized I had nothing left. And my mom, my dad, walked out on her. She's broke, Lucy. We both are. It's just us now." I turned my gaze toward Linda. Her eyes, once sharp and judging, were red and tired. She lowered her head, a gesture I never thought I'd witness from her. "Lucy," she said softly, voice trembling, "I was wrong. About you. About everything. But I have no one left. Please, if there's any kindness in your heart, help us through this." The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the soft rustle of wind moving through the trees outside. I studied them, the same two people who once made me feel small, unworthy, invisible, and tilted my head slightly. "Funny," I said quietly, "I once begged the two of you for just a little kindness. And now, it's your turn." Nathan's eyes glistened. "Lucy, I know you hate me," he stammered. "But I've changed. I've realized my mistakes. Please, just a little help." I met his gaze steadily. "I don't hate you, Nathan. Hate takes too much energy. I just regret wasting so much time believing you were worth my love." Linda's voice broke. "You can't be this heartless." A soft smile touched my lips. "I'm not heartless, Linda. I've just learned how to set boundaries. And my boundary is simple: I won't go back to anyone who once disrespected, used, or betrayed me." Before either of them could speak again, I slowly closed the door. The latch clicked, a quiet, final sound that echoed louder than any argument ever could. For a long moment I stood there breathing deeply. Then I walked out to the balcony, opened a small jar of sea salt I'd prepared earlier, and sprinkled it carefully along the doorway. It was my own quiet ritual, not out of superstition but symbolism. A cleansing. A declaration. The past no longer had a place in my present. When I stepped back inside, the sunset had painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange. I sank onto the sofa, hugging the knitted pillow Ivy had once given me, and felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not all endings are beautiful, but some are necessary. This wasn't just the end of a marriage or a toxic family bond. It was the end of silence, of shrinking myself to fit someone else's comfort. And the beginning of a life I finally chose for myself. From my own experience, I've learned something simple but profound. Strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. ***. I was betrayed. I was dismissed. I was left behind. But those very wounds became the doorway to my freedom. Life doesn't end when someone walks away. It truly begins when you take that first step forward. For yourself. And if you're reading this, I hope you find the courage to choose your own happiness. Just as I finally did.